Hey everyone, welcome to another video in our Intro to Python series. In this video, we're going to be discussing loops, particularly for loops and while loops in Python. So on your screen now, you'll see a loops.py file that I've already started. And in this file, I first defined a list called subjects that just contains some strings of some commonly taken subjects in school. Next, I have a list called numbers, or a list of numbers called nums, and this just contains the values from 1 to 10. Next, I just defined a string called string, and this just simply says this is a Python tutorial. And last, I have a list called people, which contains tuples. Each tuple in this case is of length 2, where the first item in each tuple is a string that's supposed to represent a name, and the second item in each tuple is an integer, which represents the person's age. Now suppose we want to print out each item in our subjects list. We could specify the index for each item. However, this could get quite tedious. So if I say print subjects 0, for example, to get the first item, we'll see that it prints out calculus. However, if I want to print out English, history, and physics, it can get quite cumbersome to say subjects index at 1, then index at 2, and then index at 3. Instead, we can use a for loop to make this a lot easier. So we can say for subject, and this first item here, or this first name that I'm calling subject, is completely arbitrary. You can call this whatever you want. So I'll say for subject in subjects. The value that I'm passing in after the keyword in references the iterable we want to iterate over. So in this case, the object we want to iterate over is the subjects list. So we'll say in this block of code under our for loop, we'll say print subject. And so the subject is going to be a singular item in our subjects. So first, subject will be calculus. Then when we loop again, it will then point to English. It will then go to history, and it will then go to physics. So if we save and run, we'll see that it prints out the 4 subjects in order. Alright, so let's do something similar for our nums list here. Let's print out each item in our nums list. So we'll say for int in nums print int, and just to make things easier for when we run the code, I'll just comment out this little block so that stuff doesn't get printed out again. So let's save and run. And we see that it prints out each integer from 1 to 10. So right now we've just been printing. Let's actually work with the data. So let's suppose we want to see if the number, I don't know, let's say 5 is in our list called nums. So we'll do the same thing for int in nums. And we'll say if int is equal to 5, we'll say we found 5. Found 5. And whoops, let me make the exclamation point in the string. Alright. And if it's not 5, we'll just say print not 5. Alright. And again, I'll do the same thing here. I will just comment out this block of code at the top, just so that things are a little bit clear for us to see. And actually, what I'll do here is say, I'll print out the integer that doesn't equal 5, just so we can see that it's going through each value. So we'll say int does not equal 5. I'll just replace that with not equals. Let's save and run. And we see, hey, 1 doesn't equal 5, 2 doesn't equal 5. When we get to 5, we print found 5, and then we continue going through the rest of the list. So one thing that you guys might be thinking is, hey, well, if we're just looking for 5, why do we have to iterate through the rest of the list once we find it? That's a good point. We actually don't have to. If we don't need to, if we find the value that we're looking for and we don't need to do anything else with the list or whatever object we're iterating over, we can break out of the loop. So this keyword break, what it does here is it basically says, hey, jump out of the loop. So it'll, once it gets to 5, it'll print out found 5, and then it will not run the loop for the items 6 through 10. So now if we save and run this, we'll see that it stops at 5. Now that we have discussed the break keyword, another important keyword that we should discuss is the continue keyword. And so what this keyword does is it will make it such that the loop goes directly on to the next item in the iterable. So in this example, just to modify it so we could see how the continue works, we'll say elif int is equal to 2, and we'll say continue. Whoops, continue. And so what will happen here is we'll first, when we first loop through the nums, int will be equal to 1. So we'll go down to the else branch and we'll say 1 is not equal to 5. When we get to 2, it's just going to continue here. So what this will do is we'll just immediately go to 3 and then work through this chunk of code again for 3 and then so on. So if we print this, we should see, or if we run this, I mean, we should see that 1 does not equal 5, 3 does not equal 5, 4 does not equal 5, and then we'll say found 5. So if we save and run, that's exactly what we see. We see 1 does not equal 5, and it completely skips over 2. So that's what continue does. So a use case for this is just if you don't want to process a value, but you still want to continue iterating through the list, catch it and say continue, and then it will not process. For loops are also especially helpful for running a piece of code or some statements multiple times. So a method that is really helpful for this is the range method. So in order to illustrate this, suppose we want to print the string that's defined up here 5 times, right? So instead of saying print string and then copy pasting that for 4 other times after, we can say for I in range, and then this yellow text box is quite helpful, so we'll just go over it first. So if we specify one argument, this will mean that we're specifying where to stop. And so if I say I want to stop at 5, I'll say print I, and then I want to print the string. So if I save and run, and let me just comment this out first so this doesn't get in the way. If I run this, we'll see that it prints out 0, 4, or 0 through 4, and it'll print out the string each time. So if you notice, what you'll notice that is if you specify the stop, it doesn't include that integer. So we said that we want to go up to 5, but it won't include 5. And if you only specify a stop, which we did here, the automatic start here is 0. So it'll go from 0 to 4, which is still 5 values. So that's what that means. So now let's try specifying the start, the stop, and the step. So now let's continue with this example. We'll say for I in range, and this time let's specify a start, stop, and a step. So we'll say we want to start at 0, and the max value we want to print out is 10. But as we saw, if we specify 10, 10 isn't included in that range object. It only goes up to 9. So we'll say 11. And last, we'll say that we want to step by 2 in this case. So if I do print I string again, and one more time, let me comment this out so that this doesn't get in the way. If we run this, we'll see that it steps by 2 every single time. So even though we're iterating from 0 to 11, like that's the values that I takes, it'll take a 2-step jump every single time. So it goes 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 to 10, and it will print out the string that we told it to. Now before we move on to while loops, I want to do one last example using for loops, and we'll use the people list that's defined above. So the people list is a list of tuples where the first element in each tuple is a name and the second element is their age. So if we want to print this out, we'll say for person in people, print person. Let me just comment this out right above it so that it doesn't get printed, and we'll run it. It'll print out each tuple. Now, each tuple is also an iterable, right? So we can iterate over the tuple. So suppose we don't want to print it out in tuple format like that. We just want to print out the data. So we'll say for data in person, right? We'll just say print data. Now if we do this, it'll first print John, then it'll print 18 on a new line, then it'll print Mary, and it should print 24 on a new line. So let's save and run. And there we go. That's how you get John, 18, Mary, and so on. And the only reason I did this, while this isn't like exactly useful and probably you wouldn't want to do it like this, what this is just showing is that you can have nested for loops. And you can nest them as many times as you'd like. Now, of course, the more nested loops you have, the longer it will take. So in this case, right, we are looping for each person. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4 people in the list, and each person has 2 values of data associated with them. So in this case, we will run a loop twice for each person. So there's 4 people, so 4 times 2 is 8. So in this case, we would run the loop, or we would be running, print will get called 8 times. Another way that we can print out the data, if we wanted it in the same format, would be to do for, you could do for name, and then we'll say age in people. So we already know that people contains tuples, and I already specified that the format of each tuple is first name and age. So if we do for name, comma age in people, and then print the name, and then print the age, we should have a format, or everything that gets printed should be the same formatted as this block of code right here. So we'll say, let me just comment this out real quick, save and run, and as you can see, it gets printed out the exact same way. Alright, so now we're going to step away from for loops and go into while loops. While loops are actually quite similar to for loops, and they can be used to achieve the same functionality. However, for loops are generally used for when you know how many times you're going to iterate over some given container, or you know how many times you're going to loop over in general. And while loops are generally used when those two things are unknown. So the first thing I want to display with while loops is how we can use it to iterate over our subjects list. This will be similar to how we printed out each item using a for loop, but this time we're just going to use a while loop. So first I'm going to define a variable called I, and I'll just set this to 0, and then I'll write out what we're going to do with the for loop and the body of the loop, and then I'll explain the syntax right after I'm done typing. So we'll say while I is less than the length of subjects, we're just going to want to print subjects of the ith index, not 0, and then we're just going to increment I by 1. And so what this is doing, as I just move down the screen a little bit, is the while loop is going to evaluate this expression, I is less than the length of subjects, every single time that it's going to loop. So if this statement is true, it's going to execute the body of the loop. If this statement is false, we simply do not execute what's in the loop body and we go down after the loop. So in this case, the length of subjects here is 4. So since I starts at 0, we're going to see that 0 is less than 4, and we're going to enter the loop, and then we're going to increment I by 1. So then it'll then go to 1, next it'll go to 2, and then it'll go to 3. And then when it gets to 4, when I is equal to 4, we'll see that 4 is not less than the length of subjects, which is also 4. So we're going to exit the loop. And just so this is clear, when we are running this piece of code right here, I'm just going to print out the value of I so we can see it. And I'll also go ahead and comment out this bit of code here so it doesn't get printed. So let's save and run. And we see that we have 0 calculus, 1 English, 2 history, and 3 physics. And notice how when I is 4, we do not execute the body of the loop. So as you can see, we can replicate the functionality of a for loop by using a while loop, but while loops are generally used for when you don't know how many times the loop body is going to be executed. So in order to explain this, we're going to do one last example using a while loop. And in this little script that I'm going to write, we're just going to print out the user's input. So we're going to request that the user input some kind of string or something into the program, and we're just going to echo that back out to them. So in order to type up this little script, we're going to be using the input method right here. And what this method does is it simply asks the user, or whoever's using the shell, to type something in, or to input something. So we're going to say, please type something, and we'll save this into a variable, and I'll just call this ANS to stand for answer. And let me just scroll down a little bit so you guys can see. Next, we're going to just want to check what the value of ANS is. So we're going to say while ANS does not equal Q, and Q just stands for quit, we're just going to want to print out whatever they typed. So we'll say you typed, and that's stored in the variable ANS. And then we're going to set ANS to be the output of a new call to the input method. So we'll say input and please type something. So this is our code. I'll walk you through one more time of how this is going to work. So here, right, we're calling the input method, and it'll ask us to type something. We're going to save that in the ants variable. We're going to check whatever the value that ANS is holding. So if it is not Q, we're going to execute everything in this loop. We're going to print out whatever the user typed, and then we're going to call input again. If the user typed Q, we're actually going to quit out of this loop, and this should terminate the program. So let's save it and run. And let me first just quickly comment out this code up here. And so I'll save, run. And so we see that it's running. So let's type something. I'll type my name, Sam. It prints out perfectly fine. Let's type hello. Prints out perfectly fine. Let's now try to get out of this loop. We'll type in Q, and as you can see, it exits the program. So as you can see, the while loop is really helpful for when you don't know how many times the loop is going to be executed. In this example, when I ran it, we just typed in 2 strings, and then we typed in the letter Q. However, if we never typed in Q, this program would have ran indefinitely. Like for loops, you can also use the break statement and the continue statement for any other kind of extra conditionals that you want to check. And of course, you can nest while loops together, so you can have a while loop inside a while loop, and you can have a for loop inside of a while loop inside of a for loop, or any other combination you could think of. So I think that's going to mark the end of this tutorial video. I know there was a lot of information in this one, and it can still be quite confusing. So please feel free to leave any questions you may have in the comment section below. We'll try our best to answer as many as we can. We're going to also make all of this code available. There should be a link in the description to a GitHub repository, and in that repository it'll have all the code from this video and all the code from other tutorial videos. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.